The backyard was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. I sat on the worn wooden bench, my fingers absently tracing the grooves in the wood. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and the faintest hint of jasmine from my stepmother's garden. It should have been peaceful, but inside a storm brewed. I had lived in this house for 4 years, yet it never truly felt like home. My father's second marriage had come swiftly after my mother's passing, too soon for me to understand, too soon for me to adjust. Samantha, his new wife, was younger than him by more than a decade, elegant, composed, always perfectly put together. To the outside world, she was warmth and kindness. But to me, she was distant, a presence that never quite fit into the gaps my mother left behind. The sound of the sliding door opening pulled me from my thoughts. I turned my head just as Samantha stepped outside, her heels clicking softly against the stone patio. She rarely sought me out, let alone in moments like this. I straightened, instinctively guarded. "You always sit out here alone," she said, her voice smooth but laced with something unreadable. I shrugged. "It's quiet." She smiled, a small, knowing thing, and took a seat beside me, closer than I expected. The warmth of her presence unsettled me. For years, we had coexisted in a polite but distant rhythm, exchanging pleasantries but never delving deeper. Yet now, she was watching me, really watching me, as if trying to see something beneath the surface. "Your father's worried about you," she said after a pause. "He thinks you don't talk to him enough." A bitter chuckle escaped me before I could stop it. "It's not that I don't talk. He just doesn't listen." Samantha tilted her head, studying me. "And you think I do?" I hesitated. This was new. She had never asked me questions like this before. Never made an effort to see me beyond the role I played in this house. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe." For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant chirping of crickets. Then she reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it sent a shiver down my spine. My breath hitched, and for the first time, I met her gaze fully. There was something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite name. Not motherly concern, not casual kindness. Something softer. Something dangerous. "You should let yourself be seen more," she murmured. "You're not a kid anymore." My pulse pounded in my ears. Before I could respond, she stood, smoothing down the hem of her dress. "Come inside when you're ready," she said over her shoulder before disappearing into the house. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of something I didn't yet understand. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew it wasn't nothing. The air inside the house felt different after that night, charged, expectant, as if something unspoken had been set in motion. I told myself I was imagining it, that Samantha's touch had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of affection. But the way she lingered near me, the way her eyes followed me when she thought I wasn't looking, told me otherwise. It started with small things. She began cooking meals she knew I liked, setting an extra plate for me at the table, even when I planned to eat alone. When my father called from his business trips, she handed me the phone first, as if I were suddenly someone who mattered in the house. It was strange, unsettling, yet undeniably intoxicating. One evening, I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water when I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned just as Samantha entered, wearing a silk robe that clung to her figure, her damp hair cascading over one shoulder. "Late night?" she asked, her voice light but carrying an edge of something else. I swallowed hard. Couldn't sleep. She moved closer, reaching for a glass from the cupboard. As she did, her fingers brushed against mine, light, intentional. I should have pulled away, should have pretended not to notice, but I didn't. "You think too much," she murmured. "I can see it in your eyes." I tried to force a chuckle, to break whatever strange tension had settled between us. "Maybe." She turned slightly, tilting her head as if studying me. "You've grown up a lot, you know. I don't think I ever really noticed before." Something in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. The way she looked at me. It wasn't how a mother figure should look at her stepson. I gripped the counter, forcing myself to keep my tone even. "I guess time does that." She smiled, slow and knowing. It does. The silence stretched, thick with something unsaid. The rational part of me screamed to walk away, to put distance between us before the lines blurred beyond recognition. But there was another part, the part starved for attention, for someone to really see me, that didn't move. Samantha reached out, the back of her fingers grazing my jawline, so lightly it could have been accidental. Except it wasn't. "You're not a kid anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My breath caught. Every instinct told me to step back, to put an end to whatever this was. But my body betrayed me, frozen in place, caught between fear and something darker. Then, just as suddenly as she had approached, she stepped away, as if nothing had happened at all. She took her glass of water and walked past me, pausing only to glance back over her shoulder. "Get some sleep," she said, before disappearing down the hall. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Something had shifted, and I knew deep down there was no turning back. The tension between us had become impossible to ignore. It was in the way she brushed past me in the hallway, the way her gaze lingered a second too long, the way my pulse quickened whenever we were alone. Every stolen glance, every near touch, felt like a step toward something irreversible. Then came the afternoon that shattered the illusion of innocence. Samantha found me in the living room, stretched out on the couch with a book in my hands. "Come for a drive with me," she said casually, twirling the car keys around her fingers. I hesitated. My father wasn't home, and she had never invited me anywhere alone before. "Where?" "Nowhere in particular." She smiled, tilting her head. "Just to get out of the house." Against my better judgment, I nodded. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling the silence. She took the long roads, winding through empty streets that led to the outskirts of town. Eventually, she pulled into a secluded park, shaded by towering oaks. "Fresh air," she said, stepping out. "You could use some." I followed reluctantly, my nerves thrumming under my skin. We walked in silence for a few minutes before she suddenly stopped near a wooden bench. "You know," she murmured, turning to face me, "you're not like most boys your age." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" "You see things. You feel things." Her eyes softened. "You remind me of myself when I was younger." I laughed uneasily. "I doubt that." She stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath. "You don't have to pretend with me." My throat tightened. Every alarm in my mind was screaming, but my feet stayed planted. Then she reached out, fingertips grazing my jawline, tilting my face toward hers. "I know this is wrong," she whispered, "but tell me you don't feel it too." My heart pounded against my ribs. I should have walked away. I should have said something, anything to break the spell. But before I could react, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The name on the screen sent a jolt through me. Dad. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I stepped back, my breath unsteady. "We should go." Samantha's expression flickered. Disappointment, something deeper, something unreadable. But then she smiled, as if nothing had happened. "Of course," she said smoothly, turning toward the car. The ride home was suffocating. She didn't speak, didn't glance in my direction. But I could feel it in the air between us. We had crossed a line, and there was no erasing it. I stared out the window, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I had to do something, because if I didn't, I knew this wouldn't be the last time. The weight of what had happened sat heavy on my chest, pressing down with every breath. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Samantha's face, heard her whisper, felt the ghost of her touch. The worst part was the silence that followed. She didn't try again. She didn't seek me out. But that made it worse, because now I knew what she was capable of, and I knew it wasn't over. I had to tell my father. The thought churned in my gut for days, twisting into knots of doubt and fear. What if he didn't believe me? What if he turned on me instead? But I couldn't stay trapped in this house, in this secret. One evening, as my father sat in his office, hunched over paperwork, I forced myself to step inside. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. "Dad, I need to talk to you." He glanced up, distracted. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. It's about Samantha. That got his attention. He set his pen down, studying me with wary eyes. What about her? I took a deep breath and told him everything. The way she lingered near me, the way she touched me, the way she had taken me to the park and said things no stepmother should ever say. With every word, his face darkened, his expression shifting from disbelief to something colder, something unreadable. When I finished, the silence was unbearable. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, he let out a slow, controlled breath and stood. Stay here. I watched as he left the room, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floors. My pulse pounded as I listened for what came next. Then voices. Low at first, then rising. Samantha, he said, his tone sharp as a blade. We need to talk. I edged toward the doorway, heart hammering. Samantha's voice was calm, almost amused. What is it? My father didn't ease into it. Did you take my son out alone? Did you say things to him? Touch him, like he says you did? Silence. Then a quiet chuckle. Oh, come on, she said smoothly. He's confused. He's always been attached to me. Maybe he misunderstood. My blood turned to ice. But my father wasn't stupid. Don't lie to me, Samantha. She sighed, and then just like that, her mask slipped. Fine, she said, voice flat. But if you think I'm the only one responsible, you're wrong. He's not a child, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Something crashed, a glass, a plate, I wasn't sure. Get out, my father said, his voice like thunder. I didn't need to see what happened next. I heard the front door slam. When I finally let out a breath, it felt like I was breathing for the first time in weeks. It was over.